talked to Aaron, his brother, and made him his right-hand man, and convinced the people of Israel that he is going to lead them out of bondage. He went to the children of Israel first and got them on board before he went to confront Pharaoh. And that's important, that a leader has the support of those he's going to lead before he takes on the devil, takes on sin. So Moses went to those people first. And now we're seeing that Pharaoh, a representation of the devil, reacts to this demand. And his reaction is basically what we said before. These people are demanding or wanting and thinking about freedom, liberation from their burden, from sin. And they're thinking about this because they have time to think about this. And they have time to think about this, therefore, because I haven't given them enough hard labor. And this is how the devil operates with every person that is in the bondage of sin. Whenever they start thinking of a better life, the devil will make you busier, more distracted, more burdened, right? And when we look at this story, we don't want to just look at the things that happened, what Moses said, what Pharaoh said, what the people said. We want to also look psychologically about why people are making the decisions they're making and feeling the different ways that they're feeling. Because that's important. Everybody who makes any decision makes it for a reason. There's reasoning behind it. I tell a good story of years ago, a pilot, guy that went to become a pilot. And right now, if you want to become a pilot, it's easy. There's a lack of pilots. But in this time, opportunities were a little bit more difficult. And sometimes people like to complain about their situation, about their bondage, about their life. But when someone comes along and opens a door and says, here's the way out, all of a sudden, they don't want to go through that door. Now, I'm talking non-spiritually here for a minute, but the psychology is the same. What do I mean? They wanted to get a job with the airline that ran them from Fort Wayne to Atlanta, to Dallas, back to Fort Wayne every day. It's great, because they wanted to be in Fort Wayne. That's great. But guess what? There were no opportunities for that run. Right? So they would complain and complain and complain that life isn't fair, whatever, so on and so forth. They didn't have the experience to do that run because they were new. Right? But then one of their friends said, you know what? If you want that run, all you need to do is take a job with this airline and do a run that is Cape Town, South Africa to Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, and back twice a day. You do that for 2 years, you'll build enough commercial hours that you can then come back here and pick your route. You know what? Complain, complain, complain. Here, let me open a door. That gets you where you need to go. Nope. What do people say? They say, that's not for me. I can't do that. There can be a lot of reasons why people think that. Sometimes people can think they're not worthy, or they're not able, or it's just outside of their comfort zone. And to a lot of people, their comfort zone is very narrow. Right? Some people's comfort zone doesn't go beyond the town they're in. And they don't want to go outside their comfort zone. Well, guess what the children of Israel were being asked to do? Leave the entire country. Leave the entire way of life that they had. Did they want deliverance from bondage? Sure, they cried to God for deliverance from bondage. That's why God came to Moses and said, I have heard the cry of my children, and I'm going to send you to deliver them. So it's one thing to cry and say, I want deliverance, but then when deliverance shows up at your door and says, here, go through this door, suddenly people draw back, right? And that's what the children of Israel are going to do. They're going to look for any reason why that's not what they need to do. You ever seen somebody like that? They get opportunity to get saved, the opportunity to get right with God, and suddenly they start fishing for reasons why they're not going to do it right now. They'll look for reasons. When the door is open, they'll look for reasons to not walk through that door. When the door is closed or seemingly closed, they'll complain all day long about not having those opportunities. But when the door is open, that's when they back up. And we'll see that right here. You say, where are you going with this? Let's look. Exodus 5 and 8, Pharaoh is speaking. He says, the tally of bricks with which they did make hereforto, you shall lay upon them, you shall not diminish aught thereof, for they be idle. There's the problem that Pharaoh thought they had. They don't have enough to do. They be idle. Therefore, or because of that, they cry, saying, let us go and sacrifice to our God. That's why they're crying, let us go sacrifice to our God. I haven't given them enough hard work to do. And I said before, the devil will always try to distract you. You know, if you're a sinner or a saint, if you want to hear from God, the best time to do it is when it is quiet. When there's nothing else going on. You can hear the voice of God when it's quiet. You can't hear the voice of... That's why some people, even if they're not watching anything, they'll want the TV on. Loud sometimes. Want something going on. Want some kind of background noise. Sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes it's because they don't want to hear from God. The music, the noise, the background, the busyness, whatever it is, keeps you from paying attention to God. Whether it's noise or just busyness in every other way, you see what Pharaoh's solution to this problem, which he had, which was people in his kingdom thinking about freedom and deliverance from bondage. That's people in the kingdom of the devil, in the kingdom of sin. They're not free, but they're thinking about it. They're thinking about a life that they could have, but don't yet. Everybody went through that stage who got saved at some point. For some people it was a long stage. For others it was a fairly short stage. But everybody goes through that stage where they have to think about what life could be like if they got right. Right? And every time that happens, the devil says, I'm not keeping you busy enough if you're thinking about those kind of things. Right? They're idle. Verse 9 says, let their more work be laid upon the men, that they may labor therein, and let them not regard vain words. They won't pay attention to these vain words of Moses if I increase their burdens. And that's what he did, right? That's what he did. If we drop down in this same chapter to verse 21, it says, and they said to them, the Lord look upon you and judge. Now, just to get you to understand here, this is the people of Israel now talking to Moses because of what has happened. He says, they said to them, the Lord look upon you and judge, because you have made our Savor to be abhorred in the eyes of Pharaoh. What's he saying there? What's he saying there? Those words are a little different because we don't use some of those words today, like savor. But what they were basically saying is, our slave work in building all these monuments and stuff, we're proud of that. We're doing good work. We're proud of that work. And you've made it to look bad in the eyes of Pharaoh. In other words, we're upset at you, Moses, because we're not pleasing our master, Pharaoh. He's upset with us now. So we're going to be upset with you. Well, you're not going to cry for deliverance and be delivered and Pharaoh be happy about it. That's not going to happen. But they were mad at Moses because Pharaoh was unhappy with them and wasn't respecting their work. What are we getting here? We're getting a mindset that people have in sin, which is, I see a better life somewhere out there, but that's not for me. People can be comfortable in a bad situation. People can be in a bad situation in their life, filled with sin and the consequences of sin, but to them, it's better than the unknown, which they're even more afraid of. Right? At least I know how to operate in this sinful world that I'm a part of. I may have generational sin. The same kind of thing is holding me in bondage that held my parents in bondage and their parents. But you know what? I know how to operate in that world. And that's where I'm comfortable, even though it's bad. And their fear of the future, their fear of what will happen if they try to leave that behind, is greater than the pain of the bondage. That's how some people think. That's why some people can come and be moved by a gospel message and not move. They're moved, but they don't move. If that makes sense. Something holds them back. And a lot of times what holds them back is not a love of sin, but a fear of the future. A fear of going out into something that I'm not used to. The devil will so diminish people in their own mind that they'll think that life of goodness and righteousness, that can't be for me. That might be okay for somebody else, but that can't be for me. Right? So, what we see here is they're mad at Moses because he has made Pharaoh mad with them. And in the eyes of his servants to put a sword. So let's read it again with that in mind. They said to them, the Lord look upon you and judge, because you have made our savor, or our work, be abhorred in the eyes of Pharaoh. So they care about the eyes of Pharaoh. And in the eyes of his servants, to put a sword in their hand to slay us. And Moses returned unto the Lord and said, Lord, wherefore hast thou so evil entreated this people? So what Moses is saying is, I understand what you're saying, and I'm going to go to the Lord and say that to him. Right? So Moses says, why hast thou so evil entreated this people? Why is it that thou hast sent me? I don't understand. What he's basically telling God is, it seems like they're right. So why have you sent me? For since I came to Pharaoh to speak in thy name, he has done evil to this people. neither hast thou delivered thy people at all. Listen. Before you're delivered from sin, you're going to have to hear the message of deliverance from sin. And hearing the message is not the same as the actual deliverance. There is a space of time between hearing the message and being delivered. Because hearing the message is only the first step. Once you hear the message, you have to believe the message. And once you believe the message, you have to take action on the message. And only after this does deliverance begin to come. So what they wanted was instantaneous deliverance without any process, without any pain, without any contemplation. You haven't delivered them like that. Leaving the devil's kingdom is not easy. Is it? Anybody that truly gets saved? It wasn't an instantaneous road, was it? I don't know, maybe for some people. But for a lot of people, for most people I would say, it was a process that started way back before the time you knelt. The time you knelt at an altar and got saved, that happens all at once. But the process leading up to that point might take years. Right? That's just the end result. People look at that and they say, thank the Lord they got saved. And they did. And it happened in a single night. But the process leading up to that was not instantaneous. Right? That's why it says in the New Testament, some people plant a seed. Others water. And God gives the increase. And sometimes a person might be a little arrogant and think that if they were the one there when God gave the increase, that they're the one that made it happen. No. You were just there at the time of the increase. The one who plants the seed and the one who waters might be years apart. Different people in different places, in different circumstances, working towards a day when you would get saved. There was a lot to happen between the time Moses went to the children of Israel and said, God has sent me to deliver you, and the time they crossed the Red Sea. And all of that between there represents the journey of every sinner to salvation from first conviction, from first thought of ever getting saved, from first thought of ever thinking, I need to be delivered. That whole journey from I need to be delivered to I'm saved is the same as the journey of the people of Israel initially crying out to God for deliverance and crossing the Red Sea. Crossing the Red Sea is a metaphor for salvation. Right? Let's drop into Exodus chapter 6 and verse 6. Break in at Exodus 6 and 6. It says, wherefore say to the children of Israel, now God is speaking, wherefore say to the children of Israel, I am the Lord, and I will bring you out from under the burden of the Egyptians. Remember, this is a metaphor. I am God, and I will bring you out from the burden of your sins. Your sins. I'll bring you out from the burden of the Egyptians. What happens when you get saved? You don't continue sinning, right? You're saved from sin. And on your journey from conviction to salvation, your sins will pursue you. But what happened to the Egyptians in the Red Sea? They tried to pursue them, but they all drowned in the Red Sea. And they didn't make it to the other side. You know what doesn't make it to the other side of salvation? Sin. sin. They'll pursue you all the way up to the altar. But when you get saved, you're saved from sin. And when they crossed the Red Sea, they were saved from the Egyptians. Right? So listen to what he says. I will bring you out from under the burden of the Egyptians, and I will rid you out of their bondage. Sin is bondage. And I will redeem you with a stretched out arm and with great judgments. And I will take you to me for a people, and I will be to you a God, and ye shall know that I am the Lord your God, which brings you out from under the burden of the Egyptians. The true God in our day and age is the one that brings you out from the burden of the Egyptians, which is sin. People saying, I still sin all the time. You're still under the burden of the Egyptians. Well, guess what? If you're still under the burden of the Egyptians, if you're still under the burden of sin, you're in Egypt. Right? Because the Egyptians didn't go past the border of Egypt. Right? So God is declaring what he's going to do. And I will bring you into a land concerning which I did swear unto Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. And I will give it to you for a heritage. I am the Lord. And Moses, so this is what God is saying to Moses. So then Moses can turn around and say to the people this same stuff. Right? In verse 9. So it says, and Moses spake so to the children of Israel, but they hearkened not to Moses for anguish of spirit and for cruel bondage. When we're dealing with people, it's important to understand where they're coming from. This is what we talked about a few weeks ago regarding compassion and empathy. Because some people might think this is just about what people did. What Moses did, what Pharaoh did, what God did, what the children of Israel did. It's about more than that. It's about why they did what they did. Every character in this story has a motive, has motivation. Right? And the children of Israel's motivation was not, we don't want to do what God says. Was not rebellion. That wasn't their motive. How do you know? The Bible tells us what their motive was. The Bible tells us why they had the reaction that they did. Their reaction was they hearkened not to Moses. But not because of rebellion. But because Moses opened the door and they said, we're afraid to go through that door. What does it say? It doesn't say, and they hearkened not to Moses because they were against God and they were rebellious. No, it says they hearkened not to Moses because of anguish of spirit. What does that mean? Because of the cruel bondage they were under. It says cruel bondage. So why would they want to stay in cruel bondage? Because it's what they knew. It's what they understood. It's what they were comfortable with. Right? They complained a lot about being slaves in Egypt, but at the end of the day, being slaves in Egypt was their comfort zone. So they complained about it all they wanted to, but as soon as it looked like God and Moses were coming to their rescue and opening a door the way out, now they wanted to back up. We're not going to do what you say. People sometimes don't want to embrace what is good because they fear it's too good to be true. And they would rather stick with the burdens they have than risk being disappointed, let down, betrayed, whatever. Sometimes people don't want to make a decision for God because they feel like they're going to be let down, because they're not going to be able to do it, because they don't deserve a good life. See, this is why God didn't get all mad with the people, because he understood where they were coming from. Even though they didn't hearken to Moses. It says they didn't hearken to him for anguish of spirit and cruel bondage. When people won't listen to the message of the gospel, you don't write them off as being anti-gospel. You have to understand where they're coming from. Well, I guess you don't have to. A lot of people don't. But there's a reason why they're making the decisions they're making or not making the decisions. That Pilate, when they said, here's an open door, you can do that, they didn't take it. Why? Because they grew up and they'd never actually left their hometown. I don't know why they chose to be a Pilate, but they were afraid. And even though the door was open, they couldn't walk through it because of fear. Listen, God is here to save you from your sinful life. But he's there to save you from the sinful part, not the life part. Right? He was afraid. He didn't walk through that door for the same reason the children of Israel didn't embrace the message of Moses. Yes, it's cruel bondage. But I understand what I'm going to do tomorrow. I'm going to go out and I'm going to work myself to death. I'm going to have a little bit of food because Pharaoh has to allow people to sleep. He has to feed them food because he wants them to work tomorrow. And they did that because that's what they were comfortable with. If you're going to make progress for God, sometimes you're going to have to do things that are out of the comfort zone. Right? They didn't hearken to Moses for anguish of spirit. Some people think it's better just to make the best of where you are at than put trust in anyone or anything else. And so they won't move. Right? They won't pursue their own dreams. Let's drop down. The devil convinces people that things cannot be different for them. Let's drop into Exodus chapter 7 and verse 1. Now God is talking to Moses again. It says, the Lord said to Moses, see, I have made thee a god to Pharaoh, and Aaron thy brother shall be their prophet. The closest analogy we can get here to something that unsaved people would understand is Moses was their union rep to Pharaoh. I don't think slaves had a union. No, they did not. But they did have a leader. Right? And God said, I'm going to elevate you in the eyes of Pharaoh. And Aaron is going to be your mouthpiece. Because after all, you already said you're not good at talking. Right? Aaron shall be thy prophet. Thou shalt speak all that I command thee, and Aaron thy brother shall speak to Pharaoh, that he send the children of Israel out of this land. And I will harden Pharaoh's heart, and multiply my signs and my wonders in the land of Egypt. Now, this is just a preview of next week, maybe. But we want to talk about hardening of heart. Right? Hardening of heart is a biblical term, but we have a term today that kind of means the same thing that people understand more, and that's called doubling down. Right? What it means to double down is what the Bible calls hardening your heart. You're going to decide, what it's saying is you're going to decide to let the children of Israel go, but then you're going to say, that makes me look weak, and I'm going to double down on not letting them go. And there's an illustration in this next lesson about compounding sin. Compounding sin. This is just a preview of next week. But compounding sin goes like this. For some reason, when people think of David's sin, they instantly go to adultery with Bathsheba, rather than the first thing they think of is murdering Uriah. Right? Because in our culture, for some reason, sins involving anything to do with sexuality become the greatest sin in the world, even if you murder people. But nevertheless, I wanted to look at it this way. Because David did what he did with Bathsheba, it led him to murder Uriah. One sin calls for another. One lie calls for another lie, and usually a bigger lie, a more complicated lie. Because a little lie is only involving one thing, but later on you might have to tell a bigger lie, a more complicated lie, and one sin usually will call for another, and another, and another. And when this series of events happen, it usually gets worse and worse and worse. And we'll see that next week, because we're going to quit, but we'll see that next week in the progression of plagues. The progression of the plagues of Egypt. Right? Because every time, what happens? Double down. Double down, and things get worse. Double down, and things get worse. And also, we're going to notice that one thing causes the next. What? See, David didn't just up and murder Uriah. He did it because of what he had done with Bathsheba. So one thing, there was a cause and an effect and a progression. There's a progression, right? The rivers turn. I can't preach next week's message, but this is this thing. The rivers turn to blood. No oxygen in that water, right? The fish die. Why do the fish die? Because there's no oxygen in the water. Sometimes you get messed up in sin, and you get messed up in a big sin because you committed a smaller sin. And this is all relative to its effect on humanity. All sin is the same in the eyes of God. Right? The fish died because the water was uninhabitable. And the fish couldn't leave the river because they don't have legs. Who had legs? Frogs. They left. But when it's 120 degrees out, frogs don't do well on dry land forever. You see where this is going, right? The frogs die. The frogs die. Now you got a bunch of dead frogs in the desert heat. That's going to attract a lot of flies. All right. You see how this is going? And this is the progression of sin. The progression of sin. You think you can manage a little sin? You think it's manageable? Guess what? It's going to get bigger. It's going to get bigger, and it's going to become unmanageable, and it's going to destroy your life. But that's next week. So for this week, we thank you for your attention, and we'll dismiss on that. Oh, no. No, it wasn't. I was off.